Python for Data Fundamentals, Unit 8A. This is just a quick introduction on kind of getting you started in a direction of working with Excel. There is a massive world out there of things that have not been covered yet, but at least this will kind of go, okay, here's a slimmed down framework of what I can do today. This is something that I put together just in an afternoon to kind of give you a head start into a general direction. So when we're looking at working with Excel, there's a lot of different libraries that you can import. You can do anything you want in Excel. You can change the font, you can change the colors, you can change cell sizes, widths, anything that you want in Excel you can automate to get a comprehensive look into what you can do with Excel. I recommend the book Automating the Boring Stuff with Python. It gets a little funky when you go from sheet to sheet, so you have 5 sheets and you want to just work on one sheet. It gets a little bit more advanced, so that's not covered today. We're only going to be dealing with one sheet, but there's a lot of information out there once you get confident with dealing with one sheet, going, okay, now I want to deal with like multiple sheets. So getting set up first, openpyxl, there's Excel is not native, so we're going to have to actually install it. I believe mine's already installed, but we'll run it anyways. And yep, I don't really need to fully install this. We're going to import our OS, and then we have to have our path to where all of our scripts are going to be, where our data is going to be, where everything's going to be at. So I know my path happens to be here. I'm going to put that into current working directory, and we're going to change the current working directory to this current working directory here, so that now I'm within this area. And in here, you're going to want to make sure that you have this Excel spreadsheet downloaded. This is just a basic one. We have company codes here. We have the company name that's associated with the codes. We have a location number, so this is just one location. This is very, very simple example. We have some kind of product identifier. We have the product name. We have whether or not we want to include this or not in our report. And then we have some measures here. We have the sell price, NLC, the sales, and the returns. None of these are formulas. You can actually build formulas using libraries that I actually shared. I'm not going to go into that today. Again, this is just going to be some simple manipulation with this spreadsheet here. So we're going to close out of this so we don't get a read error. So you want to make sure that file is within this current working directory. Next up, we're going to import a couple things now. You'll see that I'm importing it again down here. I don't really need to import it again, but we're imagining that, oh, you know, I've kind of set this up prior, maybe in a different environment, and now I want to come in and this is my actual program that I'll be working on. So we're going to import the OS. I'm going to change that to an abbreviated XL and pandas as PD, so it's a little bit easier for me to type, so I'm not having to write pandas over and over. And again, we will be going over pandas more in Python for Data 2 and Python for Data 3 for sure. And then I'm going to take and list out everything that's in directory, and I'm going to load it into this object called files. So let's go ahead and do that. And just a reminder here, that's what this is you can review. I mean, there's a lot more that you can look at online, of course, but this gives you at least a general idea of what's available. So let's go ahead and just see how this runs. So I'm going to take this whole thing, I'm going to load it up, and then I'm going to run it. So this actually kicks out here and says enter the name of the file you'd like to open. So it's going into my working directory. This is the one that I want, so I'm just going to copy this one, paste it down here. Okay, so it's opened this spreadsheet and it says, hey, what sheet would you like? Because we're keeping it simple, we're only going to be looking at one sheet, so we're going to take summary. Again, I'm going to copy this one, paste it here, and check it out. It's reading this entire sheet in. And now it's saying, hey, what do you want to do here? So I want to take a column and I want to test it. And if it doesn't equal the value that I want it to equal, then I'm going to have it change a different column. So in this scenario here, I'm going to say column 3 here has to be 3. So if it's not a 3, then we're going to change it to not include it, which you're not seeing it here. It's actually going to be column 5. We're going to change it from a yes to a no, saying we don't want to include it. So we're going to take and say, all right, so column 3, what value should it equal? It should equal 3. And what column would I like to change? I'd like to change column 5. And what new value would you like to enter? We'll say n, because we don't want to include it. And now it's giving me an option. Do I want to make more changes or do I want to close out? So I'm going to hit close. Pretty straightforward program. Go back into here. And we can see it's actually changed this for us. I'll admit it's not the best intuitiveness, needing to know the index of the spreadsheet and where all the columns and everything are at, but it's a starting point to say, okay, I can get into a spreadsheet, I can actually put in some conditions into the spreadsheet, and I can change criteria and rewrite it and close the spreadsheet out. This is what I mean by a strip down of something that's working that you can build on. So we'll close out of this and see what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. These again are modules that could be put into different files and called in at any time. This one's one called load file, and I'm making some global variables here. So I'm taking file and I'm saying I want the file name to be global because I may want to use it down the line. I'm going to make the workbook object because I may want to use that. I'm going to make the worksheet. This is kind of messy again. Like I said, I just really made this over an afternoon for an example. So this, I'm going to take this and make this one also a global variable. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to print out the current working directory, and then I'm going to print out all the files that are in that working directory. So when we run this, because these are loaded right now, we should be able to see, okay, here's my current working directory, and here's all the available files that I have in that directory, which is kind of cool. And then it asks this question, hey, what file would you like to open? And it loads that into this object called file. The next thing that it does is it says, okay, well, let's go ahead and take this working directory that we have, and I probably could have just put CWD in here for current working directory. I didn't need to put the whole string in here again. I'm going to concatenate that with the file, which is right here, and I'm going to put that into location because this is what we're going to use to load the file up. So we have the Excel, it's loading the entire workbook, it's taking the file, it's loading this in, and then we're taking all of this right here, which is the different sheet names. So if there's multiple sheets, it would actually load all the different sheet names into here. And this is where we have it saying, all right, let's go ahead and print out the different sheets. So when we saw the summary down there, if there was multiple sheets, it would actually print out all the multiple sheets coming from here. The next thing that we have down here is exploring the sheets. So again, there's a lot of exploration that you can do. This is just really, really basic. And this one I have a rec for the requirement of the sheet that I want to explore. You can name things whatever you want. I just went with rec. And then I've got the sheet object, which we'll see what that is in a second. We're taking this active, we're taking the sheet names and the requirement, we're loading it into here, and we're actually taking this piece that's been loaded and putting it into an object called sheet object. Anyways, going on here, we've got this thing called sheet object, which we're going to also make this active, and this is really just the sheet that's going to be the active sheet, and it's going to be global. And we're taking the rows and the columns because we're going to be using those a couple of times in different functions. We're going to say we want the rows to be global and the columns to be global, and those are going to be the actual indexes that we will use. So for here, we were taking an input and we're saying, okay, what sheet do you want to work with? We saw that when I ran the program, it loads it into something called rec, makes it global. And then down here, we're going to be using sheet names. It's got our workbook that we're working with, and it's looking at the sheet names, it's looking at the index and saying this is the one that we actually want, which again was summary. We typed in summary, went into here, that's the index of the sheet names, and then it loads it into, this is going to be our active sheet. So then we're taking the active sheet and we're saying, okay, let's go ahead and load this into an object so then we can not be fully connected here and we just have this as an object. For this object, what we're going to do then is try to establish what the max row and the max column is so that we can use that when we're looking at ranges. So we're going to take the sheet object and we're going to say, I want to see what the max row is. I'm going to load that into rows. I'm going to see what the max column is. I'm going to load that into columns. And this will be used in our loop down here to get our headers. So this for loop right here, what this is doing is we've got our headers, we've got a blank list here, we've got this iterator that's going to be in here that's blank, and we've got a range from 1 to, what is columns again? Columns is going to be the max column number, so it's going to count all the columns, go to the max, and it's going to add 1 to it. The reason why we're adding 1 to it is because for whatever reason, this starts counting at 1, and we know Python starts counting at 0, so we want to work with this and make sure that we have the top in, because remember, if you say 0 through 10, it's actually going to go 0 through 9, because it doesn't bring in the top. So this makes sure that we've got all of our columns covered. That's where that +1 is. So we're going to the max, and we're saying this is our range from 1 to +1. I've tried putting 0 in here, it doesn't really work, so we have to work with it this way. Like I said, when you're working with ranges, when you're working with indexes in Python, you really want to be on top of it because it can get out of hand pretty quickly. So we've got our range in here for our columns. The next thing that we're going to do is our sheet object, which remember this is a sheet for the summary that we're working. We're working with what cell we want in the sheet object, and we're saying, well, we want the first row, which again is the first row. Like in Python, we would think that would be 0 because that's how Python indexes things. It's indexing on 1 being actually the number 1. And then the column is going to be the I, which will be like we don't have anything loaded in here right now. So as you can see, it's going to go through each column and read this into a cell object. That cell object will have a value, which will be essentially the column header, and it's going to append that to your headers here. So that's what this chunk is doing right here. Once it's done with this loop, it kicks out, it prints the headers. A little print here says, okay, here's what your headers are, does a carriage return, prints your headers out. I do 120 multiplied by this equal sign to give us a little border, then another carriage return, then I say, okay, here's your number of columns, here's your number of rows to give you a little input on your data. So if we run this just to kind of see it, we should still have data loaded. You can see how we've got our headers, that's this. We've got all of the header names that have been iterated through and returned to the screen. And then we have the number of columns and the number of rows. This will give us at least some indicator of our indexes. So if we say, okay, well, really, I want to be looking at my product, that's probably going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, or 0, 1, 2, 3. I'm sure right out of the gate, you can look things up and find out, hey, it's actually this way, not the other way, or you can just try it. And for me, I find it faster to just try it and test it and see if it works. So as we go down here, the next thing that we have is we're going to view the object. It's a little bit of a stretch, but if you were guessing, I think this is bringing in all the data, you'd be correct. So this is taking the sheet object, it's bringing in all the values, it's putting it into a data frame. Pandas, I really like pandas. It's a little hard because I'm being forced to use some of these old XLS things. I prefer getting into pandas to work with data frames. It's a lot cleaner, especially when we get into Jupyter notebooks, which if you're wondering when are we going to do that, pretty soon. It's just good to see how to work things in the console. Anyways, this is going to load into a data frame and then we can actually print it out and it'll look nice. So if we run this, we can see this runs pretty nicely and prints to the screen. If we were in Jupyter, we would see this as well. This column, it wouldn't do this. It wouldn't truncate a little bit. Truncate's not the right word. But anyways, it would give us all of the data in a nice table if we were using Jupyter. But right now we're just in the console, one thing at a time. All right, so it gives us that. If you didn't have this, it would be really messy. You would see your headers and then you'd see all your data kind of squished over right next to each other. It doesn't look very good. Next, we have the menu here, which just gives us some options. It's a really lo-fi menu. It just says, do you want to make more changes or do you want to close out? And then it's a basic if then else. So if we want to make more changes, it kicks us right back into exploring the sheets, viewing the objects and changing values, else we just exit. Finally, we have, or not finally, but close to finally, we have changing values. So with this one here, we have, again, our data frame loaded in. We probably could have made that a global up here. There's a lot that could be better with this. Again, this is just a very kind of quick and dirty example. So here we're loading this into a data frame. We have the data frame here. And then we're saying, okay, what kind of change do you want to make? So this again is just going to be essentially like an if then else statement that's being done in a data frame. So I'm saying, okay, what column do I want to test? I load it into column, and then what should it equal? And this is going into control. And then what column would I like to change? And that's going into column 2. What new value would you like entered into that column? That goes into new value. So the if then else in a data frame using pandas, using this loc here. So we got df.loc, this is the location of it. So we've got the data frame and we say, okay, if this column equals control, then this column will have a new value. So if these are equal, this is your if then else. If these are equal, then this will be a new value. So we've kind of flipped from the if then else's that we learned in the Python standard library back to what you do in Excel, where you're using commas a lot for your if then else's. This will look a little bit more like an Excel formula, to be honest. But that's how that plays out. It's loading all of these into your if then else. And then finally what we're going to do is we're going to write this to an Excel file. This is again another pandas 1.2 Excel. We have the file that we're loading in, we have the sheet name, we have the requirement that's going to be going in as the sheet name. And then we're taking out the indexes because we don't want these 0s, 1s through 9s, these ones writing out to the sheet. So all those are going to be false. And then finally we have our definition to start the program, and then we actually start the program. That is a lot, and it's pretty quick that I ran through that, and there's a lot of areas of opportunity. Oh, like I never even referred to that. I haven't cleaned up my code yet. So you're seeing this hot off the press. The next thing that I would probably suggest as you go through this is play around with this, make sure that you can get this to work, and now think of upgrades. Like, what would my next steps be if I was to do this? You know, and some of this stuff I might know, some of it I might have to look up, but some easier things are add menu items to see results. Like this one right here, what would be the logic to change value is pretty basic. Can you make it more complex? So I'm really saying this needs to equal this. Could you say, well, the company needs to equal 1, the location needs to equal, and maybe you can make these different locations. You can make this more of a complex if then else statement to essentially decide if you want to include or not include different products in your formulas that you're going to be returning back, or how you want your formulas to run. So you can make these very complex if you want to. Another thing that you can do that's pretty easy is learning how to create a field that is a summary of 2 other fields or a formula from 2 other fields. This is something that I don't think I'm going to cover, but it's not too hard to figure out and do and Google around and find. All right, so that is a really quick and slimmed down version of using Python with Excel. There's a whole world out there with Python and Excel. This is just to kind of get you moving and giving you some ideas of what you can do. So good luck, and I'll see you in the next unit.